Okay, so this segment of the stream here, I want to go into detail with how to apply a pit overlay to your track build in NASCAR Racing 2003 here. So, prerequisite you want to do here in setting this up here would be to copy what you have in your pit lane 0, because you need to establish a pit lane 1 section to include. You want to have at least half a dozen or so stalls at the pit exit and the pit entry. So that's another entry. Now it doesn't matter, and I'll go into more detail with this as far as what the values are on the first stall. It's just the very first stall 0 and the very last stall that you define in your pit lane 1 that is going to make the difference. So it's like, even if you do this retain the values for your Delong DLAT for the ones you copy over, that's fine. The critical ones would be your last stall in that section and the very first stall, and like I said, I'll go into more detail with that. So you want to basically just copy your pit lane 0 section up to like the first few stalls, okay? And probably the best way to do it here is just to take the first 6 stalls or so on your pit lane 1 protocols here, and then the last half of your stalls, as far as a good 6 of them, a half a dozen or so, and paste that in there. That'll be the start of it. Once you got that established, this is where you can start applying the areas as far as that will define as far as the commit line, as far as like where you have to be down to pit road, and extend out from the active pit road, which would be your pit lane 0 basically, and then where your exit is as far as in your pit lane 1 in comparison to your active pit road, which would be on your pit lane 0. Okay, so just to kind of show how this looks from here, I'm going extended surface view. So this is already laid out as far as the layout of this here is already established as far as this works. This is how you want it to basically look for a track like this. So what's going on here is you've got your apron your pits, which cues the spotter to tell you that you're closing in on pit road and you need to be down to speed. Now, keeping in mind, you can see where the active pit road is further up the way here, so it's not going to be until up to here or so. So it's like further up the way anyway, as far as the direction of the track. So the way this is set up here on this Delong, and the best way to determine as far as where your Delong's at is to bring out your linear guide. Linear guide is your best friend when it comes to this type of stuff. So I'm going to stretch this out this way and put it in that position as far as where that Delong is at. And this is something that gives you something to be able to point at, to be able to determine these values, these Delong values in particular, that you'll need to apply to your pit lane 1 section. So what you'd want, this has got a little bit of a curve here. You want to go to the widest point, the largest value, as far as how where this line is. So you want anywhere on these white squares on your linear guide will give you that value. So let me zoom in here a little bit more so you can see the values. So it'll show up in white values here. So as I point that over there, you'll see the value is 1244.62, and then this value is 1245.10. So if you look at this is the numbers, you want to go with that biggest number, like I said. So the 1245.10 is probably what you'd want to use, and actually apply that here. So we got it at 1244.75, so we kind of split the difference between the two. So we had it like a 1244, just to kind of go and show them again, 1244.62 and a 1245.10. So we kind of split the difference there. So you don't necessarily have to use that. You can split that difference, just to kind of, and just run your you can even set your linear guide up here, say for example to this length of your car, which is 6 meters. So I'll set this up to roughly 6 meters like this, from front to back. Alright, so roughly that length is from front to back. This would be the size of your vehicle. Now if you grab this by the middle, it won't adjust it. So as you come across it here, you can definitely read where that value is going to land. So in considering, as far as like if the vehicle is past that point, it is not the nose and it's not the rear end of the car, it's the center point. So it's like what the simulation considers at the center point, and I've mentioned this before several times too. If in any given segment, when that center point is in here, if the car is not fully engulfed in that segment, as this one here is fine, but it's like if the segment is too short, if it's too small, it won't necessarily pick it up. So this will work for on purposes here as far as the car to be completely engulfed to include that center point. That is the heart of what the simulation will read as far as whether or not a vehicle is in a segment, as far as in this case our pit overlay to say yes, you need to be down to speed once it's past this point. So like once the car gets to here, it's going to determine, okay, is he speeding, right? So it's not going to be back here, it's going to be right here. So if it's fully engulfed in that segment as it is here, it's pretty close, but this will work, and we'll prove this I guess when we test it in the simulation. It'll pick this up as far as if it's speeding once it gets past that point. Okay, so that's something to take into consideration. So that is our start point for setting up the commit line for our pit lane start. Okay, this value will definitely come into play as far as how we set this very last pit stall, or very first pit stall coming onto the pits. So we got this set to 1249. You want that to be higher than your actual commit line. So it'll be basically the first line. So whether or not you make it the same and or a little bit higher. So we got it at 1249. So let me zoom in here a little bit more. So we got it set to 1249. And again, it's based on the center point, not the front or the tail, the center point of where the car would be. So 1249 is right about there. So again, so what happens when the simulation reads these two values, as far as it gets the car past this commit line, as far as that where the pit lane starts, and this is defined as pit road and pit stall, it's going to read all this together as far as to determine whether or not that car is actually on pit road. And this is all, again, all based on the pit overlay, not the active pit road, which would be further up the way. So that's for pit entry. Now for pit exit is pretty much the same thing. So I'm going to take the linear guide with me over to pit exit. Alright, so we're going to bring this over here. So bring it up over here, and I can reorient this so that it's front to back here 6 meters. And I can get that value from way over on the right hand side there if that hasn't been made clear. So I'll set this up to 6 meters. Roughly like so. So that's the length of our vehicle, and we can grab this by the center. So same thing here. We want to put this Delong, and the way we've got this set up here, it'll actually be at this white line. So again, we got this extension of the pit road and the pit stall to accommodate. This line is going to be where we're going to be clear. Hence the apron near pits. This is what will cue the spotter to say you're clear of pit road. You can, and again, just as the pit entry, it's all in determination of where the center point of the car is. So by the time it hits this point, you'll be clear. The center point, not the front, not the tail, but the center point. So once the center point is past that point, it'll say clear. So this is the way this one's set up. So for this Delong for our pit lane end, that's our other value we need to plug into our pit lane 1 section. So pit lane 1, we got to look at our pit lane end. Come on now, where am I? That's the merge, I'm sorry. So pit lane end Delong right here, which is, we got it set to 190.57. So if we look at that value right here, 190.57. Now again, you want to go by the longest, your largest value gets as far as your Delong. So in this case, if we put it on this end of the line, we're at 190.79, and this one's at 189.18. So we kind of split the difference just like we did on the pit entry, as far as to put it at a 190.75. Okay, so you don't have to use exactly the same value on the end or that, you can definitely just split the difference to give it that, and you can always double check that. 190.57, I bet, just to reiterate. So again, you can use this to determine, okay, at what point is that 190.57 is going to be, now this is coming like off a pit road. That's going to be roughly right about there. So once the car hits that point, as far as past the center point of the car, that's when it's going to say it's clear. So if that's sufficient, whatever like that value will work, and we'll test this out in the simulation too. So if we go 190.57 is that. So the same goes for the as it does on pit entry. Your pit stall, for the very first pit stall, you want that to be less than that number, and this is all in determination of what direction your track is. So just how you would lay your pit stall behind that line. This is how the simulation will read in conjunction with having the pit road, the pit stall defined, as well as that pit end on your pit overlay set up as we just went over. We want to set the very first stall on that pit lane 1 to be behind that line. So as long as it's behind that line, you don't want it to be the same in most cases. You want it to be less than. So in this case, we've got it set to 194.13. So again, we want to determine this by the center line. Not the front, not the tail, the center point. So 190 points. Set that. Double check this. So 194.13. And okay, so in this case, we do have it on the other side of this. We'll test this out to see if this will actually work. And generally, what you'd want to do is have it over here. Okay, so the fact that we've got it over here, this may or may not work. We'll test this in the simulation to actually see how this works. But generally, in most cases, you want to have this be behind this line and into this this area that's defined as pit stall. So we will test this out in the sim to actually see how this works. And if it does work that way, then leave it that way. That's just fine. But that's a little bit of explanation as far as how to set up a pit overlay on this. Making sure that your apron near pits on exit is on the opposite side of your actual pit lane start. And now, considering your active pit road would be, this would be your pit lane 0 value, which would be your just past the stall 0, the last stall on pit road, and the same goes for your very first pit stall on your active pit road on this end. So you would have that value. Those are two separate values. Now the simulation will actually calculate as far as like that distance from where the car is on the pit overlay in comparison to where the active pit road on pit lane 0 is, and determine whether or not the car is actually in that zone or not. And if it's not, it will either issue a black flag or not. That's the whole concept behind taking advantage of hot pitting or just speeding too soon or whatever, and just kind of expanding on what actually happens in NASCAR in reality to just use that ability. We have that ability, I guess, as far as what the pit lane 1, and especially if your track doesn't have 2 active pit roads, to be able to use that pit lane 1 to your advantage, to be able to make an overlay or an extension of the active pit road in comparison to pit lane 0. So hopefully that explains a little bit. We're going to be testing this all in the simulation next, just to see how all this works. And if it does or doesn't, we'll make the appropriate adjustments based on these parameters that we've put in this pit lane 1 section.